Los Angeles, 1971. A live television studio, cameras rolling, millions watching. And Chuck Norris, 6-time world karate champion, just stood up from his chair on national television, pointed directly at Bruce Lee, and said 5 words that changed everything. This man is a fraud. Now here's what nobody expected. Bruce Lee didn't argue, didn't defend himself, didn't say a single word. Instead, he did something so shocking that the host froze. The audience went dead silent, and the cameraman almost dropped his equipment. Bruce calmly removed his jacket, loosened his tie, and stepped into the open floor of the studio. What happened in the next 90 seconds wasn't just television. It was the moment that proved, once and for all, whether Bruce Lee was real or a Hollywood invention. And the answer destroyed Chuck Norris's argument in a way that still haunts him 50 years later. To understand why Chuck Norris called Bruce Lee a fraud on live television, you need to understand something most people get completely wrong about 1971. Bruce Lee wasn't famous yet. Not in America. Not even close. See, there's this myth that Bruce Lee was always a star, that he walked into Hollywood and everybody just knew. That's not what happened. In 1971, Bruce Lee was a failed television actor. The Green Hornet had been cancelled 4 years earlier. He'd been passed over for the lead role in Kung Fu, a show literally based on his idea, handed instead to David Carradine, a white man who couldn't throw a real kick to save his life. Think about that for a second. Hollywood stole his concept, gave it to someone else, and Bruce had to watch from the sidelines. So what was Bruce doing in 1971? Teaching, running a small martial arts school, training celebrities in their backyards for cash. He was 30 years old, broke, frustrated, and running out of options in an industry that saw him as a stereotype, not a star. And if you've ever been in a position where you know your own worth but nobody around you can see it, you understand exactly what that feels like. That slow burn of being underestimated every single day. Now here's where Chuck Norris enters the picture, and this is the part most people don't know. Chuck and Bruce were actually friends, not casual acquaintances, real friends. They'd met at a martial arts tournament in 1968, Ed Parker's Long Beach International Karate Championships. Bruce had done his famous demonstration there, 1-inch punch, 2-finger push-ups, the whole thing. Chuck was competing, already a champion, already building his reputation. They hit it off immediately, trained together, sparred together. Bruce even helped Chuck develop his kicking techniques, something Norris himself has admitted publicly. Let me say that again. Bruce Lee improved Chuck Norris's fighting. That's not speculation. That's from Chuck's own mouth. So why would a friend call Bruce a fraud on national television? What could possibly have gone so wrong between these two men that Chuck Norris would sit on a live television set, look at Bruce Lee, and try to destroy his credibility in front of millions? Here's what nobody talks about. By 1971, Chuck Norris was the establishment. 6 consecutive middleweight karate world championships, magazine covers, sponsorship deals. He was the face of American martial arts, and Bruce Lee was threatening everything Chuck stood for. Not by competing in tournaments. Bruce refused to compete. He called tournaments dry land swimming. Pointless. Artificial. He said real fighting had no rules, no points, no referees, and that's what made Chuck furious. Because if Bruce was right, then Chuck's entire legacy, every trophy, every title, every championship belt, meant nothing. You see the problem now? This wasn't about friendship. This wasn't personal. This was survival. Chuck Norris had to discredit Bruce Lee, or Bruce Lee would discredit him just by existing. But the television appearance, the public confrontation, that was never supposed to happen. What was supposed to be a friendly joint interview turned into something neither man planned. And what triggered it will surprise you, because it wasn't Chuck who started it. The show was called Late Night Live, not Carson, not Cavett. A smaller program, syndicated, trying to compete with the big networks by booking controversial guests and encouraging conflict. The host, a veteran broadcaster named Martin Gale, had a reputation for one thing: pushing buttons. He didn't want polite conversation. He wanted fireworks. And on this particular night, he got exactly what he engineered. The booking was simple on paper. 2 martial artists, 1 American champion, 1 Chinese immigrant instructor, sitting down to discuss the growing popularity of martial arts in America. A friendly conversation. That's what the producers told both men. That's what their agents agreed to. But Martin Gale had different plans. See, Gale had done his homework. He knew about the tension in the martial arts world between traditional competitors like Chuck and revolutionaries like Bruce. He knew that Bruce had been making public statements dismissing tournament fighting. He knew Chuck took those statements personally, and he knew that if he put these two men next to each other and asked the right questions, something would explode. This is a lesson worth remembering in your own life, by the way. Sometimes the most dangerous person in the room isn't the one who's angry. It's the one who's asking the questions, the one who's steering the conversation, the one who looks neutral but has an agenda. Remember that. Backstage, 30 minutes before taping, Bruce arrived first. He came alone. No entourage, no manager, just Bruce in a simple dark suit. A production assistant later recalled that Bruce spent 20 minutes stretching quietly in his dressing room, not warming up to fight, just centering himself, breathing, focusing, the way he always did before anything important. Chuck arrived with 3 people, his manager, his training partner, and a journalist from Black Belt magazine who was writing a profile on him. Chuck was wearing a blue gi, not a suit, a martial arts uniform, on a talk show. Think about that choice for a moment. You don't wear a gi to a conversation. You wear a gi to make a statement. You wear a gi because you want everyone in that room to know exactly who you are and what you represent. When Bruce saw Chuck in the hallway, he smiled. Genuinely. Extended his hand. Chuck shook it, but something was off. The warmth was gone. The easy friendship they'd had in training sessions, the laughter, the mutual respect, all replaced by something stiff, guarded, competitive. Bruce noticed immediately. He always noticed. Reading people was as natural to him as breathing. They barely spoke before going on air. 2 men who had once trained together in Bruce's backyard in Bel Air, who had shared meals with each other's families, who had pushed each other to be better fighters, now sitting in separate dressing rooms in silence. And here's what was happening that Bruce didn't know. 15 minutes before the cameras rolled, Martin Gale visited Chuck's dressing room privately. What was said in that conversation has never been fully confirmed, but Chuck's training partner, who was standing outside the door, later told a martial arts journalist that he heard Gale say something along the lines of, "Bruce has been telling people your championships are meaningless. Don't you want to set the record straight?" Whether those exact words were spoken or not, something shifted in Chuck Norris during that conversation, because the man who walked onto that stage wasn't Bruce Lee's friend. He was Bruce Lee's adversary. And he came ready for war. The studio lights came on, the band played, the audience of 200 settled into their seats. Martin Gale walked out, microphone in hand, grinning. He could already smell what was coming, and what was coming would be remembered not for the words that were said, but for the 3 minutes of silence that followed them. The interview started normal, almost boring. Martin Gale introduced both men. The audience clapped. Chuck got the bigger applause. He was the champion, the known quantity, the American. Bruce got polite curiosity, the foreign guy, the TV sidekick, Kato. Gale lobbed softballs for the first few minutes. "Chuck, tell us about your championships." "Bruce, what is Kung Fu exactly?" Standard stuff. Both men were cordial, professional. Bruce even complimented Chuck's tournament record on air, said he respected anyone who dedicated themselves to mastery. Chuck nodded, thanked him. For about 7 minutes it looked like nothing would happen. Then Gale dropped the match into the gasoline. "Bruce, you've said publicly that tournament fighting is, and I'm quoting here, organized nonsense. Chuck holds 6 world championship titles in tournament fighting. Are you saying his titles are nonsense?" Now stop and put yourself in Bruce's position. You've just complimented this man on camera. You've been respectful, gracious, and the host just weaponized your own words against you in front of a live audience. What do? Backtrack and look weak? Double down and insult your friend? There's no clean exit. Bruce paused. 3 seconds. 4. Then he answered carefully. "I respect Chuck's discipline. What I question is the system itself. Points fighting doesn't represent real combat. It's an abstraction. Chuck is excellent at that abstraction, but abstraction and reality are different things. Diplomatic, measured, honest, without being cruel. Most people would have left it there. But I want you to notice what Bruce actually said, because Chuck certainly did. Bruce essentially told national television that Chuck Norris was the world champion of something that didn't matter. He said it politely. He said it with a smile. But that's exactly what he said. Chuck's jaw tightened. His hands gripped the armrest. And what came next wasn't planned, wasn't scripted, wasn't part of any producer's strategy. Chuck turned to face Bruce directly, ignoring Gale entirely. You know what I think? I think it's easy to criticize from the sidelines. I've fought, I've competed, I've proven myself against real opponents under real pressure. What have you proven? You teach movie stars in their backyards, you do demonstrations, but when's the last time you actually fought anyone? The audience shifted, uncomfortable. This wasn't banter anymore. Chuck wasn't finished. I think you're a great demonstrator, Bruce. I think you're a great performer. But a fighter, I don't think you've ever been tested. Not really. And until you have been, I think calling yourself a martial artist is generous. Dead silence. 200 people holding their breath. Martin Gale leaning forward, barely containing himself, and Bruce Lee sitting perfectly still, his expression unreadable, processing what his friend just said to him in front of millions of viewers. What happened in the next 60 seconds is why you're watching this video, and I promise you, it's not what you think. Here's the problem Bruce Lee faced in that moment, and it's a problem you've probably faced too, just in a different arena. Someone publicly questions your competence, your skill, your identity, not privately, where you can handle it quietly, but in front of everyone. Your co-workers, your family, your audience. And the person doing it isn't a stranger. It's someone you trusted, someone you helped, someone who knows exactly where to cut because you showed them your vulnerabilities when you thought you were safe. That's what made this different from a random insult. Bruce had trained with Chuck. He'd opened up his methods, shared his philosophy, corrected Chuck's technique with his own hands. And now those same hands were folded calmly in his lap, while the man he'd mentored called him a fraud on national television. Most people in that situation do one of two things. They explode or they shrink. They lash out with anger, or they retreat into silence and let the accusation stand. Both responses lose. Anger makes you look unstable. Silence makes you look guilty. It's a trap with no obvious exit. Bruce found a third option. He turned to Martin Gale. Not to Chuck, to the host. And he said something so simple it almost didn't register. "May I have some space on your stage?" Gale blinked. The audience murmured. Chuck stiffened in his chair. Nobody expected a request. Not a rebuttal. Not a defense. A request. Polite, calm, almost casual, like a man asking to borrow a pen. Gale, sensing television gold, immediately agreed. "Of course, Bruce. The stage is yours." Bruce stood slowly, unbuttoned his suit jacket, folded it neatly, placed it on his chair. Then he loosened his tie, removed it, laid it on top of the jacket, every movement deliberate, every gesture controlled. The audience watched in complete silence, 200 people who had no idea what was about to happen. And I need you to understand something about Bruce Lee's physicality that television never properly captured. At 5'7", 141 pounds, Bruce Lee did not look like a fighter, not by American standards, not compared to Chuck Norris, who was taller, heavier, visibly muscular in his blue GI. If you'd lined them up side by side and asked a stranger who'd win in a fight, every single person would have picked Chuck. Everyone. Bruce walked to the center of the stage, the cameras followed him, operators adjusting on instinct, not direction. Nobody had told them what to film. They just knew. Something was happening. Bruce rolled his sleeves to his elbows. Then he looked directly at Chuck Norris. Not with anger, not with aggression, with something far more unsettling. Invitation. "You said I've never been tested." Bruce's voice was level, conversational, like they were still sitting at the desk. "You said I'm a demonstrator, a performer, so let me demonstrate. Come test me, right here, right now, in front of everyone." The studio went absolutely still. A security guard near the stage entrance took a step forward, then stopped, unsure of what to do. Martin Gale gripped his desk with both hands, his face caught between terror and delight. The audience collectively leaned forward like a single organism. Chuck Norris didn't move. For 5 full seconds, the 6-time world karate champion sat in his chair and didn't move. And in that 5 seconds, something shifted in the room that everybody felt, but nobody could name. Because Bruce Lee had just done something tactically brilliant. He hadn't attacked. He hadn't insulted. He'd simply said, "Prove it. You say I'm not real. Come find out." The burden was on Chuck now. If he stayed in his chair, he was the one who backed down. He was the one who was all talk. His own accusation had become his trap. And if you've ever watched someone realize in real time that their own words have cornered them, you know exactly the expression that crossed Chuck Norris's face. But what Chuck did next, and what Bruce did in response, is the moment that separates this from every other talk show confrontation in television history. Because Bruce Lee wasn't just prepared to defend himself, he was prepared to redefine what fighting meant, live, unrehearsed, in front of cameras that couldn't look away. Everything you think you know about what happened next is probably wrong. If you're imagining a Hollywood fight scene, 2 men squaring off, trading blows, dramatic music, forget it. What actually happened was stranger, more impressive, and more revealing than any choreographed movie sequence could ever be. Chuck stood up. He had to. Staying seated would have been an admission that everything he'd just said was performance. So he rose from his chair, adjusted his GI belt, and walked toward the center of the stage. The audience gasped. Not clapped. Gasped. Because this was live television and 2 martial artists were about to face each other with no script, no choreography, and no rules. A producer off camera was frantically signaling to cut to commercial. Martin Gale waved him off. "Are you kidding me?" his expression said. "This is the greatest moment in the history of this show. Now here's where conventional wisdom fails completely. Most people assume the impressive thing Bruce Lee did was hit Chuck Norris, that he knocked him down or embarrassed him physically. That's the story you'd expect. That's what the thumbnail suggests. But the truth is far more devastating than a punch. Bruce didn't attack. He invited Chuck to attack him. "Whenever you're ready," Bruce said. Arms relaxed at his sides, not even a fighting stance, just standing, open, completely exposed, to a 6-time world karate champion standing 6 feet away. I want you to think about the insanity of what you're hearing. A 141-pound man just told a professional fighting champion to take his best shot, on live television, with no protective gear, no referee, no rules. Either Bruce Lee was genuinely delusional, or he knew something about combat that Chuck Norris, with all his titles, didn't understand. Chuck circled to the left, slowly, testing, looking for the angle he'd use to win 6 world titles. Bruce didn't circle with him, didn't mirror him, just turned his head slightly, tracking Chuck with his eyes. Relaxed, almost bored, and that's what got under Chuck's skin more than any insult could have. The complete absence of concern. Chuck threw the first technique, a right roundhouse kick, his signature weapon, the technique that had finished dozens of opponents in tournament competition. Fast, powerful, aimed at Bruce's midsection. It never landed. Bruce moved. Not jumped, not dodged, not blocked in any way Chuck recognized. He just wasn't where the kick arrived, like water moving around a stone. Chuck's leg swept through empty air, and for a fraction of a second he was off balance, exposed, vulnerable. In tournament fighting, that fraction of a second means nothing. Your opponent is 3 feet away, waiting for the referee's reset. In real fighting, that fraction of a second is everything. Bruce was inside Chuck's guard before the kick fully retracted. Not punching, not striking, just there. His open palm resting lightly against Chuck's chest, right over his heart, the message unmistakable. I could have ended this. I chose not to. Chuck stumbled backward, not from force, from shock, from the realization that he'd thrown his best weapon at a man half his size, and that man had materialized inside his defenses like a ghost. The audience erupted, not cheering for violence, cheering for something they'd never seen before. Speed that didn't look like speed, movement that didn't look like movement, mastery so complete it resembled magic. But Bruce wasn't done, and what he did in the next 45 seconds transformed this from a physical demonstration into something that would reshape how the entire world understood martial arts. Because Bruce Lee didn't just prove he could fight. He proved something far more important, something that still matters today, something that applies to your career, your relationships, your entire approach to conflict. Here's the bold claim. What Bruce Lee did on that stage wasn't fighting, it was teaching, and the student wasn't Chuck Norris, it was every single person watching. After that first exchange, the palm on Chuck's chest, Bruce stepped back, gave Chuck space, reset. The audience was buzzing, electric, but Bruce raised one hand and the room went quiet. Just like that. One gesture from a 141-pound man silenced 200 people instantly. That's authority you can't fake. That's presence earned through decades of discipline. Bruce looked at Chuck, then he looked at the audience. Then he did something no one in that studio anticipated. He started explaining what had just happened. In real time, on live television, like a professor breaking down an equation on a chalkboard. Chuck threw a roundhouse kick, Bruce said, calm, almost gentle. It's an excellent technique. In a tournament, it scores points. But watch what happens when there's no referee to stop the action. He gestured for Chuck to throw the kick again. Chuck hesitated. You could see the conflict on his face, pride telling him to engage, instinct telling him something was different about this man, something dangerous. But the cameras were rolling and 200 people were watching and millions more at home. Chuck threw the kick again. Same result. Bruce wasn't there. But this time, instead of placing his palm on Chuck's chest, Bruce narrated his own movement. I'm not blocking. Blocking is wasted energy. I'm occupying the space he's leaving empty. Every attack creates a vacancy. I fill it. I need you to hear that line again because it might be the most important concept in this entire video, and it applies to far more than fighting. Every attack creates a vacancy. I fill it. Think about that in the context of your own life. When someone attacks your reputation, they expose their insecurity. When a competitor undercuts your price, they reveal their weakness on value. When someone argues from emotion, they abandon logic and leave it undefended. Every attack in every arena creates a vacancy. The question is whether you're skilled enough to see it and fill it. That's what Bruce Lee understood that Chuck Norris didn't. Fighting wasn't about force meeting force. It was about perception, about seeing what others miss, about being fluid enough to exist in the spaces your opponent creates by attacking you. Bruce demonstrated 3 more exchanges. Each time he invited Chuck to attack. Each time he dissolved the attack and showed exactly how and why. He wasn't humiliating Chuck, and this is crucial. He was elevating him, using Chuck's skill as the foundation for a lesson that transcended martial arts entirely. By the 3rd exchange, something remarkable happened. Chuck stopped looking frustrated. His expression changed. The competitive anger melted into something rarer. Recognition. The recognition of a man who suddenly understands he's standing in front of someone operating on an entirely different level. Not a higher belt, not a better fighter, a different dimension of understanding. Chuck lowered his hands, dropped his fighting posture, and in a moment of raw honesty that the live audience couldn't fully appreciate but that history would remember, Chuck Norris said 6 words of his own. I've never seen anything like that. No defensiveness, no excuses, no qualifying statements, just truth, from a world champion to the man he'd called a fraud 12 minutes earlier. The audience didn't cheer this time. They sat in stunned silence. Because they understood they'd just witnessed something that went beyond entertainment, beyond sport, beyond television. They'd watched one man's entire worldview dissolve and reform in real time. Martin Gale, for the first time all night, was speechless. His manufactured controversy had transformed into something he never intended. Not conflict, revelation, not drama, education. Bruce Lee had taken a trap designed to diminish him and converted it into the single greatest public demonstration of martial arts philosophy ever broadcast. Bruce walked back to his chair, put his tie back on, buttoned his jacket, sat down, as if nothing had happened, as if he hadn't just dismantled a world champion's attack 3 times without throwing a single strike, as if he hadn't just taught millions of people a lesson about conflict they'd never forget. And then Bruce said the line that would be quoted in martial arts schools for the next 50 years. The line that would appear on posters, in documentaries, in training manuals across the world. He looked directly into the camera, not at Gale, not at Chuck, at the lens, at America, and said quietly, "A real fighter doesn't need to prove he can fight. He only needs to prove he doesn't have to." 2 men walked into that studio. One was a proven champion with 6 world titles, magazine covers, and the full backing of the American martial arts establishment. The other was a broke immigrant teaching celebrities in backyards, passed over by Hollywood, dismissed as a sidekick actor with fancy hands. On paper, there was no comparison. Chuck Norris had won everything. Bruce Lee had won nothing. But here's what that night revealed, and it's the reason this story still matters decades later. Credentials and capability are not the same thing. Not even close. Chuck had proof. Trophies, belts, records. Bruce had something else entirely. Understanding so deep it didn't need validation. Skill so complete it didn't require a scoreboard. Mastery so authentic it could only be demonstrated, never explained. And the world saw the difference. In real time, unscripted, unfiltered. After the show, Chuck Norris went back to his hotel and called Bruce. That phone call lasted 2 hours. Nobody knows exactly what was said, but what we do know is this. Within 3 weeks, Chuck Norris was training with Bruce Lee again. Not as an equal this time, as a student. The 6-time world champion went back to being a beginner, and if that doesn't tell you everything about what happened on that stage, nothing will. Think about what that requires. The humility to admit publicly that your entire framework was incomplete. That a man you called a fraud understood something you'd missed across 6 championship victories and thousands of hours of training. Most people would never recover from that realization. Chuck Norris let it rebuild him. And Bruce? The morning after the broadcast, his phone didn't stop ringing. Not just Hollywood agents, universities wanting him to lecture, magazines requesting interviews, martial arts schools across the country asking him to teach seminars. The man America had ignored for years became the man America couldn't stop talking about, not because he won a fight, because he refused to have one while proving he could win it any time he chose. Within 18 months, Bruce Lee was filming The Big Boss in Hong Kong. Within 2 years, Fist of Fury. Within 3 years, Enter the Dragon, the film that changed action cinema forever. The trajectory from that television studio to global icon wasn't accidental. It was the direct result of a moment where one man's authenticity overwhelmed another man's credentials on live television. But I don't want you to leave this video thinking this is just a Bruce Lee story. It's not. It's your story. Every single day, you face your own version of that studio. Someone questions your ability. Someone with more titles, more followers, more money, more apparent proof dismisses what you know to be true about yourself. And you have the same choice Bruce had. You can argue, you can get defensive, you can list your qualifications and hope they're enough. Or you can do what Bruce did. Step into the open space. Stay calm. And demonstrate your truth so undeniably that the person who doubted you becomes your greatest advocate. Not through force, through clarity, not through conflict. Through competence so deep it speaks for itself. Chuck Norris spent the rest of his career telling people Bruce Lee was the greatest martial artist who ever lived. The man who called him a fraud became his loudest champion. That didn't happen because Bruce argued better. It happened because Bruce showed him something words could never communicate. That's the lesson of that night. That's the principle embedded in the palm placed gently on a champion's chest. You don't defeat doubt with debate. You defeat it with demonstration. You don't earn respect by demanding it. You earn it by being so undeniably excellent that denial becomes impossible. A real fighter doesn't need to prove he can fight. He only needs to prove he doesn't have to. Bruce Lee proved it, on a small television stage, in front of cameras that almost cut to commercial, in a moment that was never supposed to happen, and it changed everything.